Hello again, my name is Ollie, this is Economics Unlocked, and today we take a look at behavioural economics. So what's so different about behavioural economics then? Well, in more traditional economic theory, it was assumed that everyone will act rationally and also that people will try and achieve the optimal outcome in any scenario. But behavioural economics looks at the times when people are irrational or when they're not looking for the optimal outcome. It's about the small, subconscious and automatic decisions that we make. But it is gradually being used by both governments and businesses to influence bigger and bigger aspects of our lives. So while traditional economics is all about prices, supply chains and demand curves, behavioural economics is focused on our psychologies, our instincts and our emotions. Now, not all of behavioural economics is necessarily very surprising, and some of these examples might fall into the category of things my mum knows but economists don't. Well now, economists know them too. Behavioural economics can help governments because they need to spot where irrationality causes problems in markets. And in many markets, implementing a behavioural solution can often be much cheaper than a traditional solution, like a subsidy. For businesses, it's useful to find subtle ways of getting people to buy more stuff and spend more money. So overall, this area of economics is very relevant to modern societies. Today, we're going to take a look at the journey behavioural economics has been on so that you can better understand where the subject is today. First off, economist Herbert Simon was one of the first to look at behavioural aspects, and he proposed that people's rationality is bounded by three factors. Firstly, how manageable the problem is. The more manageable the problem is, the more rational people's decisions are. Secondly, people's mental limitations. And thirdly, time. The more time people have, the more rational their decisions are. Simon took it further and explored the idea of heuristics. These are simple strategies or rules of thumb that help get people around the three limitations. One of his most famous is the SATISFICING strategy. This is a way that people can achieve satisfactory outcomes even if they don't get optimal outcomes, and it has three parts. Firstly, someone sets a series of initial aspirations as to what it is that they want. They then reject any options which don't fit these aspirations and accept the first alternative which satisfies all the requirements. If a person doesn't find anything that meets their aspirations, then after time they will lower their expectations and look again. This process repeats until a person's aspirations are low enough to be met. I think a good example of this is the housing market, because the problem of finding the optimal house isn't very manageable. It's not practical to look at every house in the country, so people just look for a satisfactory house. People often set a series of aspirations about the house that they're looking for. You know the sorts of things, how many bedrooms, bathrooms and so on. Then people look at different houses, and when they find one which meets all their requirements, they buy it. If they don't find anything after a certain amount of time, then they lower their aspirations and keep looking. In this way, the person isn't necessarily getting the optimal outcome. They're not looking at every house in the country, they're not coming to a rational decision about which one is the best house, but they are finding a satisfactory house that's in budget and which meets all their requirements. And over time, economists have discovered loads more examples of little strategies and shortcuts that people use to make decisions. If you'd like to see a video with more details on how people's shortcuts can affect you, then let me know in the comments. But here's a sneak peek to whet your appetite. First up, the availability heuristic, where people predict the frequency of an event based on the availability of an example. This can be used to explain why people think homicides are more common than suicides, because homicides appear more on the news or in TV dramas. There's also the representativeness heuristic, which means people think someone is more likely to have a particular role or qualification if they represent the stereotype for that role. You might consider this a helpful predictor of someone's job title, but it's incredibly unhelpful when jurors believe a person is less likely to have committed a violent crime if they arrive in court relaxed, well-dressed and clean-shaven, because they don't fit the stereotype of an angry, scruffy person with particularly menacing eyes. Later, another economist, Daniel Kahneman, along with others, developed prospect theory. Prospect theory states that people don't value things purely by their usefulness and utility. Take these two people. To start with, person A has £1 million and the other person has £9 million. But then, after some time, they both end up with £5 million. Person A is going to be much happier than person B. Even though now they both have the same amount of money, person B is much less happy with his 5 million than person A. Kahneman took this further and developed evidence for loss aversion, that people value losses more than they value the equivalent gain. So if someone lost £10, they would value that £10 note more than the £10 note they got from their aunt at Christmas. even though rationally both notes are equally useful to them. This might explain why people are more likely to go ahead with medical treatment if you tell them it has a 90% survival rate, as opposed to saying it has a 10% death rate, even though these are exactly the same chances. In 1981, Kahneman conducted an experiment which is particularly relevant today, where people were asked to choose a treatment for 600 patients who had a deadly disease. Some people were asked question 1 and had to choose between a treatment which guarantees that exactly 200 people survive, or a treatment which has a 33% chance that all 600 people survive, and a 66% chance that all 600 die. Have a think. Which would you choose? Others were asked question 2 and had to choose between a treatment which guarantees that exactly 400 people will die, or a treatment which has a 33% chance that all 600 people survive, and a 66% chance that all people die. Which would you choose? You'll notice that option 2 is the same in both questions. Let's compare the options in question 1. Since 33% of 600 is 200 people, statistically it's the same as the 100% chance that 200 people survive, so it doesn't actually matter which option you choose. But when asked, 72% of people choose the certainty that 200 people survive over the chance that 600 do. You might think, what's the big deal? People prefer the option with a bit more certainty. But the results in question 2 are very different. The choice in this question is actually the exact same choice, since if 400 people are certain to die, then the other 200 are certain to live. Only the wording is different, yet when faced with question 2, only 22% of people went with the certainty that 400 people would die. This reveals that people choose the more certain option when it's presented in a positive way, but they are willing to take their chances when the same option is presented in a negative way. Now this demonstrates that utterly irrational behaviour can be achieved simply by changing the wording of a sentence. This might be a good reason to read more than just the headlines in a newspaper, and it's why so-called spin is very important in politics, because the way a choice is presented to the public will change how they feel about it. Kahneman was also instrumental in publicising the idea that people have two systems of thinking. System 1 is fast, instinctive and emotional, while System 2 is slow, deliberate and more logical. Now Kahneman describes how System 1 is used when reading or working out where a sound is coming from. But he also demonstrates that System 1 is how chess masters decide what move to make, and that System 1 is used to understand most simple sentences. And so it becomes clear that a lot more of what we do is done instinctively and not logically. He also demonstrates the flaws in both systems and is instrumental in the understanding of cognitive biases. These are flaws built into either system of thinking which cause us to make irrational judgments and decisions, often believing that they are perfectly rational. Behavioural economics has also benefited from the work of Richard Thaler. Thaler started his work by looking at trivial examples of when people are irrational in everyday circumstances. For example, when you're eating too many nuts or crisps before a dinner and you're grateful when somebody takes them away. This doesn't make sense in a rational world, because either you want the nuts or you don't. But in fact what you want is the choice to be taken away from you, which completely contradicts the traditional free market understanding. Thaler believes that these somewhat trivial examples may hold the answers to wider social issues, and he is credited for helping make behavioural economics a practical reality. It was in 2010 that the UK government set up the Behavioural Insights team, who have now implemented hundreds of projects which nudge people to make better life choices. For example, in the UK, when you start working, a workplace pension scheme is now the default option, whereas before the default was to have no pension. This hasn't changed the choice available to people. After all, people either want a pension or they don't. But it has increased the number of people in the UK with a private pension from about 40% to 70%. Behavioural economics is now being used across the world, from governments to ski resorts, and the work of these economists is beginning to change the world we live in. The question is all this for the better, or will it result in a nanny state gone too far? That's it for this one, everyone. Don't forget, there's a new video here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, and don't forget that hitting that like button or that subscribe button costs you nothing, but is really helpful to us. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day.